Aha, yes, it's flashing. I can see you. Or I can see me, at least, on the screen. Hey, how was your weekend? Right now, it is, exactly 11:42 a.m. in Ho Chi Minh City, which I appreciate is still the middle of the night in the UK, and who knows in the US, because it's so big. I know that a lot of people aren't going to make this live, but I also know that a lot of people do watch the replays, which is really cool. So give me a wave if you're here, if you're up at an ungodly hour, and do me a little hashtag replay, and give me a wave if you are here watching the replay. Let me know where you are and when you are. And yeah, how was your weekend? My weekend was, it was pretty good. John has been working from home, he's been teaching from home all week last week, which means that I basically spent quite a lot of Saturday catching up, because we can't both work at the same time, which is fine. And then on Sunday, we spent the whole morning as a family, which was really, really lovely. And where we are, yes, we are in a sort of mini lockdown, as in we can't go to places and everywhere's shut, but because of where we live, there's a shared garden with all the apartment blocks. So we have 4 apartment blocks on each corner of some beautiful gardens. And there's a path, and there's the pool in the middle. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? There's a big swimming pool in the middle, which is frustratingly closed. Doesn't really make any sense because all the benches in the area around the side are open. So everybody's just standing next to the pool in these small groups. So we're allowed to meet in about groups of 10. And the children go around on the scooters or their inlines or wherever. And yeah, that was just really lovely. And we have a cafe nearby, so John hopped to the cafe and we had smoothies. 'Cause normally at the weekend we go out and we do our family meeting at a diner over in Tao Dien, which is nearby. It's just a few, maybe 10-minute drive from where we are. So we're trying to keep that tradition up, and we talk about what we're going to learn this week. We talk about, what mummy and daddy are doing and how that's going to look, and we just have our lovely family meeting and what we're grateful for and what we're thankful for. And right now, it's friends, most definitely, and each other. We're getting through. So I also got to do, which is the main reason I wanted to hop on, and also to say I hope you had a lovely weekend, welcome to a new week, is I had this incredible experience of discovering this. It's a series of lectures, so it's a new film which is out by Gabor Mate, who is a seasoned trauma writer, and he's just done some really incredible stuff. And so he has just produced this film called The Wisdom of Trauma. And I haven't watched it yet because I got sucked into the lecture series. There's a whole, 3 or 4 lectures every day. So some of them are lectures and some of them are panel discussions about different aspects of trauma. So there was intergenerational trauma, there was racial trauma, there was ancestral trauma. We also talked about the biology of trauma and how we store it in our bodies. And I got reams of notes. There were points where I genuinely had to stop and ask John for a hug, and then I came back and carried on, because if you're not moved by the stories, you're not in the right profession. So it felt like quite a heavy weekend, but also very empowering. And I wanted to share with you some of my favourite takeaways. Some of them were new to me and some of them were not new, but all of them I think bear repeating, because quite often it's not necessarily about, do I know this, do I understand this? It's that further question, which was first posited to me by a writer called Hal Elrod, who wrote The Miracle Morning, and he says, when you hear something and your knee-jerk response is like, yeah, I know, follow it up with, and am I living it? And I think sometimes we know things and then we forget about it, don't we? We just carry on our lives and we don't live the knowledge that we know. So really interesting, the things that I wanted to share, and I will write these in the comments because they're so interesting. So there was an interview between Gabor Mate and Dr. Peter Levine, PhD, who is a trauma therapist he works in the United States, and he was one of the first people who wrote the first book based out of his practice about how we store trauma in the body, like areas where we have recurrent injuries or constant pain. And he talked about when he worked with his clients, well, I guess for him they're patients because he's a psychotherapist, whereas I'm a coach and a mentor. So in his therapy setting, he talked about when they reached the kernel of what it was, and his patients forgave themselves or others or found closure, whatever it was that they needed to do, because of course it's so nuanced, that he noted. He was one of the first people to note and to write about and to then put into research, people shaking and the physical, so people going pale and their pulse dropping and shaking and having this experience, this physiological experience, as their emotions and their trauma left their body as they healed. And he was saying, him and Gabor Mate was saying that one of the key things to note about trauma is that it's not necessarily what happened to you, it's about the internal response. And this was the initial starting point. Was I talk often about my birth with my firstborn. She was premature. I had literally no idea what was going on. No idea, because I hadn't been to any classes or anything by 35 weeks. It hadn't all started. I'd made one introductory session. I didn't know what was going on, and I probably should have been a bit more skilled up, but I wasn't, because I thought that I had longer. So anyway, I went into hospital. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I don't feel very well, and ended up having a baby that day. And it was like a full-on hospital deal with forceps and episiotomy, and there were 2 crash teams because I wasn't very well. So it was a crash team for me, and it was a crash team for Sophia, and she was taken off to the special care unit. I had stitches, and almost everybody that I saw assumed that I was traumatized. Everybody, and I wasn't, and I'm still not. And there is a really important reason for it, because it on the surface of it looks like, oh, that was a traumatic event, you must be traumatized. And I was offered therapy and support, and I did choose to have, that's better, there's a light, to have a debrief with my, the registrar who was there at the time. And he said, do you know about PTSD? Do you know about these things? This is who you contact, blah, blah, blah. And he remarked that I looked very, very calm. It's like, I feel like, because I had lots of control over the situation, and maybe because I went in not knowing what was going on, but I had been doing hypnobirthing, so I might not have done the NCT stuff, but I had been doing hypnobirthing and empowering myself, and I'd read lots of books, and I had spent the whole labour very relaxed and very calm. John and I worked as a brilliant team because we had put the work in before, so he knew what I wanted. He knew. So I remember there was one point where the midwife was, she wanted to take John away, to take him on a tour of the special care unit, and I was like, nope, don't want that, and then went back into my meditation, and she was trying to talk to him, and I remember him saying, I want to have this discussion away from my wife, because she said that she doesn't want to overhear anything. We talked about this in advance, and they checked with me, and I nodded and told them to go away, and then off they went. And there was actually quite a funny moment, because they stood outside the door and I could still hear them, and John always laughs about this, because I was going, I can still hear you, go down the corridor, and off they went. And that's what I needed to do, and that made me feel very powerful. And then so when it came to the point where bless her, she was just too little, she was stuck, I was okay with that, because I had power, and I can't truly explain it, but even when I look back on it, I felt powerful. And in that situation, my internal response was one of, okay, I understand what's going on, I understand my wishes are respected here, and given the choice, and I did say I want a choice of what happens next, and it was explained, and I said, okay, that one, and there we go. So there was an option for a C-section, there was an option to keep trying, and then her heart rate dropped, and then I made the choice to say, okay, I want that intervention, and then it happened, and there it was. Interestingly, the special care unit, I came away from that needing counselling, and the reason, and a very good friend of mine didn't, and I think the reason for that was that I felt powerless and I didn't know how to cope with that. So it's another version of how one person can go through the same situation and be very traumatized, and another person can go through the same situation and feel empowered. I still feel very proud of her birth, and I chose to have the boys at home with we had home birth midwives, and I feel very proud of those births. I don't feel like either one let me down, which is another assumption a lot of people make, because they see an event and they label it as traumatic, and it's not necessarily. And I find it quite interesting that Mate and Levine were talking about that. They also talked about, I remember Dr. Peter Levine, he took it further, and he said, I'm going to read this, what we hold inside, so it's not the event that happens necessarily, it's what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic present person. I'm going to say that again. This is Dr. Peter Levine. So trauma is what we hold inside after an event in the absence of an empathetic present person. That really struck me, because I have heard that a lot. A lot. And from my memory of the special care unit, I remember that as well, that I just didn't know what to do, I didn't know where to turn, and afterwards I did, and so I could access the healing. But at that time, in the moment, John and I were both in a sea of, well, trauma, and then we both moved on together because we got counselling, because they offer it afterwards. Unfortunately, not everywhere. And we did have to pay for it, but it used to be free. But that's a different life, isn't it? So they were also talking about the things like, so trauma that disconnects us from ourselves, because we need to protect ourselves. So when you're going through a very stressful situation without the, what is called, the empathetic present other, we have to have a way to protect ourselves. And that way could be a coping mechanism, like having an addiction which numbs the pain. It could be complete dissociation. It could be anger and lashing out and blaming other people. It could be extreme self-reliance because you don't trust other people anymore. These are all ways of protecting ourselves that relate back to trauma, an event, or not necessarily one flashbulb event. It could be an event or a series of events, a way of living that you had to protect yourself from in the absence of an empathetic present person. Peter Levine actually went on and he explained his story of being hit by a car, and that he felt himself dissociate. Of course, he was a psychotherapist by then, so he knew what was going on, and he said he almost felt himself leave his own body to protect himself from what was going on, even as he was lying on the floor listening to the sirens. And somebody had come over to him and said, I don't know what to do, what can I do? And he, makes me emotional, it's been a really big weekend, and he said, just sit with me, just hold my hand. And this person did. She just held his hand. And he said, even with decades by that point of experience as a trauma therapist, as a psychotherapist, as he was a child psychotherapist, or still is, and he was saying, even with all of that, I don't believe that I could have made that event not traumatic without the presence of another person, stranger or otherwise, having a physical connection, an emotional connection. It's really interesting. So I know that time is ticking on. I didn't want this to be a long one, but I'm putting the link actually down below so that you can go and watch the film. I'm going to watch it tonight, and I'd be really interested in it if anybody else wants to share what you take away. So they also talked mostly about the self and separation, that separation from the natural world, separation from other human beings. And yes, they touched on the fact that the pandemic has completely exacerbated this. There's only one other takeaway that I'm really desperate to share, and it was from a different lecture, which was about collective trauma and it being caused by excessive, what do they call it? Excessive separate identities. This whole, myth that we are an island unto ourselves. We're not. We are what they were talking about as being like earth beings. We are all interrelated, and as human beings, we naturally, we are genetically predisposed to be social animals. And when we remove that, because I know, of course, the irony that I'm behind a screen right now, but this is a way of connecting with other people. And of course, I'm about to then go connect with my family in the kitchen. That lack of connection and the myth that we are our own selves, that we can be a whole village, is crushing us, and it is causing its own form of trauma. The really wonderful thing, so there was Dan Siegel, who's got a new book out called Awake, I believe. I'll put the link to the book because I'm about to go buy it. I nearly bought it on the spot actually, but I didn't want to lose my place in the video. And he talked about a tool that he has created. He was the child psychotherapist. The other one worked with adults. So he talked about the adult measure of attachment, which is an interesting tool that he has pioneered with another psychologist called Mary Main. And it was an indicator, I'm going to go and research that as well. It's an indicator to see whether people have, we all have trauma. Some with a capital T, some with a lowercase t, for want of a better way of explaining it. We all have things that we carry with us, and we all have experiences in our background that have flooded us with I can't cope, and this is the beginning of trauma, isn't it? When it's too much for us to cope and we have to have a mechanism, which is the switching off, the lashing out, that kind of thing. And he, through his research, which is why he was on this particular panel, he had shown, this is a wonderful good news story, I might do this again later on in its own life. He had shown that this tool is wonderful because it can ascertain whether any given adult has unresolved trauma, so whether they've had trauma, and then whether they have resolved it or whether they're carrying it with them and they need to have access to healing and support work. This is the one bit. And the really amazing thing is that they have shown through studies, which I'm going to go and ferret out for you, don't worry, they have shown that if you have trauma, even when it is very significant trauma, if you have trauma and you have made sense of it, you have healed and you have moved on, that you will not pass that on to your children. That is incredible. So you can have trauma, you can have this upsetting upbringing, you can have the unresponsive upbringing, you can have flashbulb events like a car accident or whatever, and you can be traumatized. You can carry the trauma from your childhood or events in your previous parts of your life. And if you have made sense of it, if you have accessed support, if you have accessed healing, if you have talked it through, like they said, made sense of it, because that is the best way to cover all bases for all people, because we all do it in different ways, don't we? You will not pass that on to your children. That's what I wanted to share with you. It's just wonderful, isn't it? So I want you to know there's hope. It doesn't matter what has happened. It's important, and it has, yes, it's made you a bit of who you are, and you didn't deserve it, and maybe you felt powerless. And a lot of people, the whole reason why I set up this Facebook group, the whole reason why I do what I do in my group and my one-to-one work and with the Conscious Parenting Toolbox as a starting point, the whole thing is because so many people that I speak to, that I worked with when I worked with the police, so many parents when I was a school teacher, have it's referred to as like baggage and stuff from their childhoods, from their early life, from their experiences, and they are terrified of passing it on. Terrified. And if this is the special thing, and I am going to go and find his book, and I am going to go and find the paper, because I'm going to share the paper with you. That's my thing. If you make sense of that trauma, if you work through it, if you turn and you look at it and you are brave and you deal with it and you seek support and help and love and mechanisms, you will not pass it on to your children. It's nothing short of revolutionary and empowering. You can break the cycle. It's been 20 minutes, so I'm going to shush, but please know there's great news and the cycle can be broken. Have a lovely, lovely day, wherever you are, whenever you are. Bye.